December 1994, Catasauqua, Pennsylvania. A woman and her infant son are reported missing.
He called the police and he said, "Something is wrong. His wife is missing."
Their disappearance sends shock throughout the community.
Everyone is easily able to identify with a situation like this and kind of put their own family in their shoes.
There was some worry that she had been kidnapped or killed and that there was a killer out there. So there was some fear in the community.
4 months later, and their bodies are discovered in rural woodlands, brutally murdered.
The cause of death for Joanna was a gunshot to the face, to her head. And they could tell that it was a .22 caliber bullet.
When the police finally identify the suspected killer, they deny all knowledge.
She professed her innocence, and she made the case that she had done good things in life.
The fact that she had lied about owning a gun, the fact that she had no alibi that stood up.
This is the heart-wrenching story of Joanne and Alex Katranak, their terrifying disappearance, and what fueled their killer to commit such a murder.
The jealousy was so great that this became the motive for murder.
Catasauqua is a picturesque city and historic steel town in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania.
Catasauqua is a diverse community. We have approximately 6,700 people. We're 1.3 square miles, and we're bordered by Lehigh Valley International Airport, the city of Allentown, Whitehall Township, and to the north Catasauqua Borough. We do have our share of crime, but not so much violent crime.
On December 15th, 1994, Andy Katranak arrives home to an empty house. Unexpectedly, his wife Joanne and baby are not there.
He came home, I believe he noticed that preparations had started for dinner. There was some chicken out, but she wasn't home. He thought she might have been home already, and she was not. He waited a little while, and I believe it was around 8:30, he started to get more and more concerned she wasn't home yet, and called his mother. She was actually supposed to meet his mother earlier in the day to go Christmas shopping. And his mother said that Joanna had never shown up.
You can imagine what's going through this poor man's mind at the time. He works hard all day. He's been doing that for a while, working on some friend's home about 10 miles from home. In the days before cell phones, he hasn't been in touch with his wife or his baby, who was 4 months old, by the way, all day long. Gets home. She's supposed to be home. He knows that she's gone shopping. So at first he's thinking, oh, maybe she was held up shopping. Things are not so startling to him at that time that he sits down. I believe he has a beer. Maybe he looks at the paper. But then he starts getting worried, and he starts going through the house. And he goes down to the basement, and he sees this basement door, this old basement door that they never use, is ajar, and the hinge on it has been broken. You know, amazingly though, he doesn't immediately think break-in, kidnapping. He thinks kids, teenagers. He doesn't think that someone has really done anything, because he can't find anything amiss in his house. Nothing seems to be taken. Everything seems to be in its own place.
But as time passes, Andy grows concerned and contacts the police.
When Andy called the police about 10:30 that night, he reported that the back door down to a basement area had been left ajar or broken into.
I just talked to Allentown Police, and they told me to call you guys. I live in Caddy on Front Street.
Okay.
So, and my wife and my baby have been missing since like 2 o'clock this afternoon. And we just discovered that the downstairs basement door was jimmied open. And that's really got us worried now.
The trouble with police, no matter where they are, if they're in small town Americana or if they're in a large big city, there are so many incidents of missing persons that when a man calls, Where is my wife? She was supposed to be with my mother-in-law to go shopping. It's now 10:30 at night and she is not home. Well, this is just another missing person. This is just another situation. The police generally do not get all that concerned.
Officers eventually respond to Andy Katranak's house to follow up on the call.
So an officer responded to that 911 call, went to the address on Front Street, and started his initial investigation. He discovered a hasp on one of the doors had been broken, and he also discovered some phone lines were cut.
With police starting their investigation, they receive a second call, this time from Joanne's sister.
It's now 3:30 a.m. in the morning, and Joanna still is not home. But her sister Peggy, who knows what's going on and knows that Joanna is not anywhere to be found, lives about 50 yards away from McCarthy's bar, and she sees Joanna's car, a tan Toyota, in the parking lot. There's nobody in the car. It's locked. They call the police.
County 911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, my sister Joanne Kachanak has a missing persons out on her. We're at 740 Front Street, and we just located her car next door.
Next door?
Yeah, but she's not anywhere to be found still.
Joanne's sister does make the call to the police. Now we found Joanne's car, and amazingly we found it in a place where she's never parked before. She had her usual parking spots. We're all creatures of habits, and hers, not unlikely, was right behind the house where they had a parking area. Also, the car was backed in, and Angie knew that Joanne had a phobia about backing her car. She would work as hard as she could to avoid having to put that car in reverse. So now they call the police, and the police are out here again at the car.
The police come to the scene. They get into the car. They find the seat has been pushed way up close to the driver's wheel. That doesn't make sense to anybody. It doesn't make sense to Peggy. It doesn't make sense to Andy. The police start to look in the car and they find blonde hairs that look that they're covered with blood. That doesn't make sense. There's a can of mace in the back seat of the car. And there's no baby paraphernalia. Wait a second. This is a mother who has a baby. There should be baby bags, diapers, bottles. Nothing's there.
I'd be looking at how many miles may have been put on that car since the time it was last filled. We'd do an investigation as to when the car was filled last. The hair from a dark-haired woman, why there would be light hair in that car would be a question to me. And why would there be mace in there?
Police start to suspect something sinister has happened and start examining Joanne's background and home life.
Common in missing persons cases, police will come out and take a report, but particularly with an adult, they're not going to be overly concerned right away. When they start to look into it, when they start to believe there's something more sinister going on, the people closest to the victim are usually very early on seen as suspects. And so it's not unusual to look at the husband, the boyfriend, or even an ex.
Well, the first thing they're going to look at is look at the family members. Find out what the relationship would be between the husband and wife, what the relationship is in the family, and find out if there are any issues. That's the first place to start. Joanne was 24 years old, had been in a previous relationship that resolved with some domestic violence, and she was quite younger than Andy, about 14 years younger than Andy.
Joanne, according to her family and friends, was really living a life of Camelot. But here she was with a 38-year-old man, 14 years her senior. She had a new baby. All indications from friends were that she was extremely, extremely happy.
Andy was athletic. He was strong. He was tall. He was, well, Joanne said he was everything.
But investigators know that appearances can be deceptive and start to check out Andy's alibi and other possible reasons for her disappearance.
So often the husband is an early suspect in one of these cases. Police also thought that Joanne might have fled on her own. And thirdly, there was an ex-husband as well.
In December 1994, police in Catasauqua, a borough of Lehigh County in Pennsylvania, are investigating the mysterious disappearance of 26-year-old Joanne Katranak and her 4-month-old baby Alex. Police start looking to the alibi of her husband, Andy.
Police have a set, pat view of life as to who is responsible for criminality. The husband is always somebody who is a suspect. The ex-husband is always a suspect. And they look at these people because it turns out that most of the time there is some involvement that they can find by doing this search of the usual suspects. Well, in this case, Andy was viewed as a usual suspect, and they wanted to know, the police wanted to know about him. Well, his alibi and his whereabouts were rock solid.
They're going to try and determine what his alibi was, what he was doing, what he might know about what happened. For Andy, he was working at a friend's house that day, doing some contract work. His father was with him for part of the day, and I believe the friend, the person that he was working for, came home and spent part of the day working with him as well.
Joanne's family are also insistent that Andy has nothing to do with their disappearance.
Joanne's family were 100% behind him. Joanne's mother said, "There's just no way Andy could have harmed Joanne. I see them. I babysat for them. I see how they relate to each other. They loved each other. There's just no animosity between the two of them. There's no motive." As you know, a husband is always the first suspect when a wife disappears. And so he was looked at really carefully by the state police. But one of the things that dropped him as a suspect was what the parents, Joanne's parents, were saying about his relationship with their daughter.
With the clock ticking, the state police, who have joined the investigation, decide to re-examine the Katranak's home and Joanne's car.
State police secured the residence, processed the house, and also processed the car. Doing a good investigation and checking every possible lead is the best thing that you can do.
They wanted to examine the house again. They looked for fingerprints. They examined the door. The cut phone line had already been repaired, but they wanted to look at that area as well. And Joanne's car was taken to be searched and looked through for evidence. As far as entry into the home, police found the attempts to remove screws from the door and from a window. They didn't believe that anyone got in through the window, and the door seemed to be damaged.
A few things that they did discover, and one of the things which is underrated, is they discovered no fingerprints of any note. There were some fingerprints found on some objects in the car, but there were no fingerprints on any of the portions of the car that a driver would have touched, like the steering wheel or the gear shift or anything like that. That becomes important later on when I can make the argument that someone wiped that car down. Someone tried to hide the evidence in that car. What they do find, though, is someone who tried to wipe that car down missed. They found a tiny spot on the backrest of the driver's seat where there were 6 long, dirty blonde hairs. Along with that, and attached to that, they found very, very minute traces of blood on the backrest of that car in the same spot where the hairs were. And then later on, it subsequently was determined that the blood had been on the hair and therefore got onto the backrest from the hair.
The thing to remember about 1993 is that DNA was just about to become a popular item, but it wasn't widely used. Common tools police used at the time were fingerprints and serology, blood typing.
Investigators are starting to run out of other leads.
So one of the reasons why police started to move away from the theory that Joanne had simply run away. There was no usage on her credit cards. She wasn't accessing her bank, and she hadn't taken much with her. The only items that were really missing were her purse and the diaper bag. And family members said to police if she was going somewhere, she would have taken more than just that.
Reports of a missing woman and baby sends panic through the local community, and police start being inundated with calls and leads.
Nobody disappears in Chautauqua in Pennsylvania. It just isn't happening. But in this case, there now was a missing person.
It always hits close to home when a member of the community, something like that happens to them, if they would go missing. Sometimes it all depends on what the circumstances are, whether the family isn't getting along, but most of the time when somebody goes missing, it's a concern to everybody.
Given the fact that it wasn't just Joanna who was missing, it was also a baby, a young child, just new to the world, it really stirs the heartstrings, particularly given the time of year, Christmas. It's a time people are thinking of family, thinking of one another, and to hear that his family is being torn apart. With a missing child, a community like Chautauqua or throughout the Lehigh Valley, we're talking about a lot of families, a lot of grandparents. Everyone is easily able to identify with a situation like this and kind of put their own family in their shoes. So when they see the posters go up, they learn that a baby is missing, that a mother is missing, it really stirs the heartstrings, and oftentimes it leads to a lot of tips. Police receive more tips than you can imagine, and oftentimes they lead in a lot of different directions. Sometimes they don't help at all.
There were all kinds of reports. This happens every time there's a case. There's some people who want to inject themselves into the case, who want to become important by thinking they've seen something that's vital. In this case, I call them my rejects. There were about 30 to 50 police reports, and they even had the FBI in the early days follow up on some of it. There was a report that she was seen in the airport. A young woman was seen with a child. There was another woman who's insistent to this day that she saw Joanne and Alex in a grocery store buying $100 worth of groceries with a tall, strange man that was with them. There was people who allegedly saw her on the railroad tracks.
The police start getting all kinds of reports, and those reports are often misleading. So difficult for the police to have all these strange reports. Oh, I saw her driving down the street. No, I saw her at the airport, came in a report. Oh no, she was at the store just yesterday. These are things which complicate the police's life. They don't know what to think. Is this just a young woman who has had it and gone off on her own, who ran away and went to the airport? Or is this a serious problem? This kind of thing confounds law enforcement. It happens all the time, and it's a dirty, rotten shame, particularly in this case.
The search continues, but Joanne and her young son Alex have simply disappeared. Finally, 4 months later, on April 9th, 1995, the police make a breakthrough.
4 months have passed, and there still is no trace of Joanna. Nobody knows where she is. Everyone now is resigned to the reality that this young woman, beautiful mother of a brand new baby, is probably no longer with us. There's a Paul Kovacek who's in his tractor. He's a farmer. He's plowing his field, and he sees in the field clothing. It's April, so he's doing his spring plowing. And he says, gee, what is that? And he gets out of his tractor and he goes and he looks and he finds skeletal remains. He is absolutely shocked. There's clothes and there are bags and the baby things nearby, a baby rattle. And he is frightened. He calls the police, and now the whodunit really hits the fan.
April 9th, 1995. A farmer has discovered skeletal remains in woodland in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania. The remains are believed to be those of Joanne Katrinak and her 4-month-old son Alex, who have been missing since December 15th, 1994.
The discovery of the remains is terrible news when a community knows that somebody is missing, and you hear that remains have been found right away. Just horrible thoughts are going through the minds of everyone that's been following that case. What the police found was the skeletal remains of an adult female, and the child, the baby, was clutched to her chest to the point where she had the child's face had sunken into her chest a little bit. That positioning, when they turned the child over, it actually had preserved the child's features. Nearby, they found a rattle. They found some other of the belongings of Joanna and Alex. And I believe on the diaper bag there were some blonde hairs, very similar to the blonde hairs that were found in the car.
That's a huge break because it gives us so many different things. Number one, it gave us some forensic evidence. It gave us 2 hairs that we found there. It gave us a baby rattle, a baby bottle, a diaper bag with its contents, which were so important in establishing time of death to me. But more importantly, it got us the area. Who would have thought to place these bodies in this particular area? Usually, if you're just trying to get rid of someone that you killed, it's going to be along some highway, not in some remote area that you'd have to take right turn, left turn, right turn, left turn to get from Catasauqua to get to this remote field. So it gave us the area and it gave us some evidence. So that was a huge break.
An autopsy of the remains is able to tell police the cause of death, and an etymologist is called in to assist with when the murders might have taken place.
Forensic science has ways by which we tell how fast insects will invade the body to determine how long the body had been there. Literally, there are body farms where the scientists study the rate at which the body decays, and we can date the time. Well, the insect invasion here would indicate that the body was about 4 months old.
They did the autopsy that was ruled a homicide on both the child and Ms. Katranak. They also discovered that she had been shot in the head by a .22 caliber, and they also found that she had been bludgeoned numerous times with a blunt object. Well, the theory at the time was that Ms. Katranak was abducted from the residence in Catasauqua and taken out to a remote location known by the suspect and murdered.
Investigators give Andy the heartbreaking news and ask him if there is anyone that would want to hurt him or wish Joanne harm. Andy mentions a phone call that was received a few days before Joanne went missing.
While Andy was being interviewed, he relayed to police a rather odd phone call that had taken place before Joanne's disappearance. An ex-girlfriend of his had called, and Joanne had answered the phone. There was some confrontation. It was a little bit confrontational. The ex-girlfriend, Patricia Rohr, had wanted to speak to Andy, and Joanne had told her that that was not going to be possible and hung up the phone.
At this stage, investigators take Andy to the area where the bodies were found.
The police decided that they needed to take Andy on a tour of the area to see if he recognized anything or something was to ring a bell in his memory that might be helpful to them. They were driving around the Heidelberg area in Pennsylvania, and lo and behold, Andy says, "Wait a second, this is where my girlfriend Patricia used to board her horses. She would ride in this area. She knew this area very well." And the police said, we got a break. We got a break here. This ride along has created a memory, and we need to follow it up.
As they started to look at Andy and some of the statements he made, and in particular in relation to Patricia, what they discovered was the night of the disappearance, or technically early the next morning, about 3 a.m., he had tried to get in touch with Patricia, even calling her mother.
So when the state police and the FBI went to speak with Patricia Rohr, they found, she explained to them that she was suspicious of the fact that they had had a child because she didn't think that Andy was able to father child. She explained to them that she couldn't leave her residence for any length of time, that she had gone to the feed store to get some feed for her animals, and she had gone to a tanning salon.
After speaking with Patricia a second time, much of her alibi and description of events began to unravel. The first time she had been very helpful. She had spoken to police about Andy and his relationship, questioned his paternity of the child. But during this second interview, what they realized is she didn't have receipts for any of the locations she said she had gone to, including for the animal feed. And at one point she had claimed she had gone to a salon, and on that day the salon told police they were actually closed. Another explanation that Patricia gave for her whereabouts was that she had gone to a nightclub, Cowboys nightclub. When police went to check on that claim, they discovered that attendees had to sign in to the nightclub, and yet there was no sign-in for Patricia Rohr.
Police learn more about Patricia's background.
Patricia Rohr was an old girlfriend of Andy, a live-together type relationship back from, I believe, 1985 through 1989. They broke up. Seems to me it was fairly mutual. Patricia would then contact Andy. Andy would never contact her, but he'd be friendly with her when she would contact him by telephone. In 1990, Patricia Rohr asked Andy if he would help her out. Rohr was beaten up. Andy came to her rescue, and Andy let her stay in his home in 1990, the home where Joanne was taken from, for about somewhat less than a week, sometime in 1990. That relationship with Andy, as far as Andy was, it was over. As far as Patricia is concerned, we believe that she still wanted to connect with Andy on some level.
The evidence gathered from the car and crime scene gives detectives a breakthrough in the case.
There were 6 blonde hairs in the automobile that Joanna drove, that her sister discovered in front of McCarthy's. There were hairs which were discovered on Joanna's body out in the field, which were covered with blood, as were the hairs in the car, also covered with blood. And that blood turned out to be Joanna's, or perhaps the baby's blood. They weren't able to make the positive match, but it was close enough that they could tell that it was either Joanna's or the baby's blood. And then in addition, in the bags which were found at the scene of the crime, there were more blonde hairs. Now, Patricia says, I'm not blonde. I'm a brunette. I have dark hair, you see. And when the police went to talk to her, lo and behold, her hair was dark. It wasn't blonde.
Patricia was a big horse enthusiast. About the time of the incident, Patricia was involved in a riding competition. Police looked at some photos of that competition and noticed that she had blonde hair, not the dark hair that she had when they interviewed her.
But then a photograph surfaced where she was riding in a competition in Oklahoma just a couple weeks earlier than Joanna's disappearance, and she had blonde hair. The examination of the hairs the police found is that they had been bleached blonde, and this was the connection that the police were looking for.
And once a known sample from the suspect was obtained, Patricia Rohr, we would compare the question sample from the seat back of the car to the known hair sample of Patricia Rohr microscopically, so that we could see if the characteristics were the same or different. If they're different, that's where the examination would stop. The characteristics looked enough like the question sample from the hairs found on the seat back of Joanne Katranak's car for us to proceed with a mitochondrial DNA examination of that hair and compare the mitochondrial profile of at least one of those hairs on the seat back to the known mitochondrial DNA profile of Patricia Rohr. At the end, we found that the mitochondrial DNA profile from Patricia Rohrer, the known, was the same as the mitochondrial DNA profile from the hair, which can't tell us that that hair came exclusively from Patricia Rohrer. But at that point, we knew we could not exclude Patricia Rohrer as a source of that hair.
The things which led the police to have a strong, compelling case, one beyond a reasonable doubt, were the hairs. The DNA, the mitochondrial DNA match between those hairs found at the crime scene, found in the car, that they matched with Patricia. That really was what we will say game, set, and match. It was all over for her. But there was more. It was the lies which she told. The lies of saying, hey, I was at the Cowboy nightclub. You weren't there. Hey, I was at the salon. You weren't there. Hey, I bought feed at the grain store. Didn't have any receipts. Didn't happen. Those lies came back to absolutely haunt her. When the police went to Patricia's house and they arrested her, one of the police officers overheard Patricia saying to her newborn child, if I had known, I wouldn't have brought you into the world if I thought I was going to be caught.
But Patricia Rohrer pleads not guilty, and the case will go to trial. On June 24, 1997, Patricia Rohrer is arrested for the murders of Joanne and Alex Katranak from December 15, 1994. The Catasauqua Police and Pennsylvania state troopers investigating the murders believe they have enough evidence against her to secure a conviction.
We have the DNA, which is clearly about 60% of our case, but we also have motive, opportunity, means, false statements, phony alibis, and behavior that's just not consistent with innocence. So based on that, I told my boss that we had enough to convict, and we filed charges against her, and she was arrested on June 24th, 1997.
When police zeroed in on Patricia and decided to make a move to arrest her, they caught part of a conversation she had with her infant child, where she said, if I had known they were going to catch me, I would have never brought you into this world.
While preparing for trial, investigators and prosecutors learn more about Rohrer's history.
Patricia had an odd background. It wasn't so odd as to that other people of her nature, of her ilk, didn't have similar backgrounds, but the oddities here were enough that they're noteworthy. She would live in North Carolina, then she would move away, and then she would come back. She was a car salesman with a car dealership where people said she was very personable. She worked in a photography studio with her mother, and she would do photography with clients that thought she was very good at this. Then she got into trouble with neglecting her animals, and she was charged with animal abuse, which became very significant in this case because she had to have the receipts for the feed which she fed the animals, and she didn't have it. And she was with Andy for a while, and then she was not with Andy, and then she wanted to get back together with Andy. And jealousy was so critical in the motive for this murder.
The little I know is that her father did die at an early age of hers. I think she had a back injury from a car accident. She had a marriage which didn't last very long.
Even after ending her relationship with Andy ended, friends noted that she continued to talk to Andy. Multiple ex-boyfriends mentioned that sometimes she would compare them to Andy. So for her to continue to call Andy, to find out that Andy had a child with another woman, that could certainly spark an obsession or an extreme jealousy.
Patricia Rohrer's trial starts on Monday, February 9th, 1998. The prosecution bases its case on forensic evidence, circumstantial evidence, and Rohrer's obsession with Andy Katranak.
It was a powerful opening argument for the prosecution. They pointed to 8 items They said that she had motive, she was angry over the phone call, she was looking to be in touch with Andy, she had a weapon that matched the murder weapon, she had lied to them, she was familiar with the family's home, and she was familiar with the location where the bodies were found.
I gave 8 different areas of evidence that we would be presenting, telling the jury exactly what I was going to do in the case. I also gave them, and it's standard for me, and especially in this case, I gave them a little warning about circumstantial evidence. In Pennsylvania and in most states, if not every one of them, circumstantial evidence, if strong enough, is sufficient for you to render a verdict of guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, since the evidence was largely circumstantial, I really beat that and made sure that they understood that sometimes circumstantial evidence is stronger than direct evidence. I believe that she surveilled the Katchenok residence from the late hours of the 12th to the early morning hours or the midday on the 15th. I believe that she saw Andy's comings and goings. I believe she learned from his comings and goings that he went early, arrived back late. I believe that she saw Joanne's comings and goings. I believe that she saw where the car was parked. She knew the house. She knew this basement. I believe that she went down to the basement door. I believe that she first tried to take some plywood off the door, and then to make it look like there was no entry. I don't believe she wanted to make it look like a forced entry, because I believe part of her thinking was this would be pretty neat if they just disappeared and Andy became a suspect, or if no one thought that it was a murder. I believe that she didn't want to do anything there, but I believe that she wanted to abduct Joanne and Alex. I have no idea if she meant to kill them right away. Maybe she wanted to get the last word with them to really give Joanne a scare. I believe that when she heard Joanne was going out, I believe that she ambushed her as Joanne was putting Alex into the car. I believe she waited until Alex was put in the car, approached Joanne as Joanne was getting into the driver's seat, had the gun drawn on her, told Joanne, get in and drive, and that she got in the back seat. I believe she had Joanne drive to the spot where she remembered that she had ridden horses back in 1989 and 1990, because that was just a perfect place for her to have her little tete-a-tete with Joanne. I believe that at some point Joanne had to know what was going to happen and maybe started to yell. I believe that Rohr punched her in the face. Joanne had a broken nose. I believe that there was a lot of blood from that. I believe that Joanne struggled. I believe that Rohr won the struggle. And I believe that Rohr shot her and then stomped her. I believe that Rohr got back into her car, changed the seat so that she could fit into it, drove back, parked the car in McCarty's after dark. She wouldn't have done it during daylight. Got back in her van, which was parked somewhere in the neighborhood, not in McCarty's, and drove back to North Carolina.
This is a case of jealousy. This is a case of where a phone call is made and a woman says to another woman, get out of my life. I am with this man now. He's not yours. This is jealousy, which seems to be one of the most ancient of motives for killing. It was something that triggered an uncontrollable rage, which resulted in shooting a woman in the face, 19 bludgeoning injuries to her body, and the death of a newborn child. Jealousy. Powerful, powerful tragedy.
Some more really good detective work is our forensics showed that the bullet that was removed from Joanne's skull could have been fired by certain types of firearms. One of them was a .22 Jennings. Other ones too, but it was circumstantial evidence they were looking for a possible .22 Jennings as a murder weapon. The death could have been caused by either the shot to the face or the blunt blows to the body. Either one separately either could have been the cause of death, but blunt force and shot to face were the cause of death.
Police were never able to locate the firearm that was used to kill Joanne. They did know it was a .22 caliber handgun. An ex-boyfriend told police that Patricia did have a .22 caliber handgun. She had purchased it from a gentleman in a wheelchair.
When they discovered the body in the field and the coroner examined it, they could tell that there was a gunshot right to her face, which was the cause of her death and the fatal blow, and they could tell that it was a .22 caliber bullet, which caused her death. They're looking for somebody with a gun, a .22. They asked Patricia, "Do you own a gun?" "No, she does not have a gun," she said. Well, that turned out to be an absolute lie. The former boyfriend of Patricia said, "Oh, gee, we went to a garage sale, and there was this guy. He was in a wheelchair, and he had a .22 gun, and he sold it to Patricia. But the gun was really strange because it only could do one shot, and then it would jam. So all you could expect from this gun is one bullet." Well, this was a lie that trapped Patricia.
I think that $50 gun was thrown away in the nearest pond as soon as the crime was committed. I had no idea, nor did my investigators, nor did my forensic pathologist, as to what blunt instrument was used to brutally beat Joanne. I don't think we were thinking outside the box at the time.
The jury leaves to deliberate, and it is an anxious time for the prosecution and investigators.
My glass is always half empty. And so even though I thought we presented the best possible case we could, and I thought, parenthetically, that she was her own worst enemy. She convicted herself by her attempting to lie about every issue in the case. Ridiculous lies, things that made her, to anybody, look absolutely guilty. So I was pretty well convinced that she had convicted herself, but I'm always worried about what a jury is going to do. The jury was out 4 hours, came back with 2 questions, went back, half hour later, convicted her. This is after a 4-week trial. She got life in prison without possibility of parole. And, you know, I have to say this, is that the victim's family, Joanne's parents, were against the death penalty. They told me that, and so I did not advocate for the death penalty. But it's not my call. It's a jury's call, and this is a death penalty case. It really is. I mean, the murder of a woman and a 4-month-old baby. But I left it completely in the hands of the jury, and I did telegraph to the jury that I was not requiring or asking for the death penalty. I've never been a death penalty proponent.
I was happy that our exams worked and gave the prosecutor information that could be used to help the jury make a decision about what happened in the case.
If I was going to ask Patricia one thing, it would be, was it worth the life of a mother and child?
The Highlands Heights Police Department receives a 911 call from Shayna Hubers, who reports to the authorities that she has shot and killed her boyfriend, Ryan Poston.
Campbell County 911.
Ma'am, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense.
Gunshot wounds to the head and to the torso of the body.
But is this really a case of self-defense?
Shayna made a mention that she was thrown into the television.
She claimed to have been thrown into the bookshelf. There had been this fight between them, and he was taller than her and bigger than her, and he was throwing her around the apartment.
Or is it the work of a vicious and calculated green-eyed killer?
I shot him twice. Thought he was completely dead and he was laying there still.
It was our job to make sure that for him, justice was served.
On an October night in 2012, the police force of Highland Heights receives a 911 call. A Kentucky woman, Shayna Hubers, has shot her boyfriend Ryan Poston 6 times and claims that it is in self-defense.
Shayna reached out to law enforcement through the 911 call. She claimed that she killed Ryan Poston in self-defense. In fact, those were some of her first words. It was the first sentence that she relayed.
She made representations to the 911 dispatcher of this violent struggle, that there had been this fight between them, and he was taller than her and bigger than her, and he was throwing her around the apartment, and she was in this struggle for her life.
Campbell County 911. Ma'am, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense.
Following Shayna Huber's 911 call, police dispatchers make their way to Ryan's condo.
I responded to the call. And the other officer was working as well. He responded with me. And we got into the building, and then, because it's a secure building, we had a neighbor let us in. I asked the neighbor if there was any shots that they heard or anything like that. Neighbors didn't hear anything, but they were working on their apartment. We get up there, we contact the 911 operator, and we tell the 911 operator to tell the person to come out with their hands up, which was Miss Hubers.
The dispatcher's talking to Shayna Hubers the whole time. The dispatcher tells her that, when the officers get there, that she wants her to open the door, tells her to put the gun down, and Shayna did tell the dispatcher where the gun was and walk out the front door with her hands in front of her.
At that point in time, she came out with her hands out. She was yelling. I couldn't even make out what she was saying. And I told her to shut up and get on the ground. We put handcuffs on her and got her out to the car.
She's the one who identified the victim for us, because at that point in time, we didn't know who it was. But Shayna told them first on 911. She said the person that I killed was Ryan Carter Poston. And she mentioned that he was an attorney from Cincinnati.
The first thing we had to do was, once we took Miss Hubers into custody, I searched the apartment to make sure there was nobody else in the apartment that could hurt us or hurt anybody else.
Once in there, he did see the body of Ryan Poston laying in a pool of blood.
He was laying behind the kitchen table. And when I checked his vitals, I didn't feel anything, so I called for the squad personnel to come up. I wanted one person to come in because I didn't want them to disturb the crime scene. How it was, I didn't turn any lights on or anything like that, because you want to keep the scene as is. So I made sure that I watched how they were walking and where they were walking at. And I wouldn't let them move a lot. I didn't let them move the body at all. Just had to move the shirt up so they could put the pads on the back so they could get a rhythm, to see if they can get a heart rhythm. And they could not find one, so they pronounced at that point in time.
When you go to that scene, you're looking for physical evidence that's going to corroborate a story or contradict a story. You already had a very detailed account on 911 of what the suspect said had occurred. So what you're trying to do is compare that story to the physical evidence and see if it matches or doesn't match. And that's what they were doing. The coroner would have been called. Anytime there's a body at a crime scene, we do have to call the coroner to take possession of it and process of it and remove it from the scene.
Immediately when I went in, I walked into a hallway, and straight through the hallway would have been the living room. Immediate right would have been a spare bedroom along with a bathroom. In the living room area, it was very cluttered.
Ryan was a bachelor. He lived alone. It was messy. It was cluttered, as most single 30-year-old bachelors would be, but it was orderly. Nothing was broken, nothing was out of place, nothing was knocked over. It was not what you would expect in the scene of some violent struggle that she had painted to 911.
We took the gun that was used, because she told us where the gun was, where she put it. The bullet casings on the ground, the spent casings on the ground, measurements of the apartment, IDs, just information at the time we thought was important.
I was actually born in Highland Heights. It is a small town community, and it's one of those communities where, you kind of know everybody. And a lot of people that are born here stay here, and they raise their family here.
It's located in the center of Campbell County, about 7,000 residents, usually a quiet town. It's a nice little community.
Place that everybody in America would be happy to live at. I could live there in the blink of an eye. It's a very comfortable place. It's a trusting place. You trust your neighbors. You trust the police.
In fact, most people that live here because they feel relatively safe in our community, and we have an amazing police department that ensures their safety.
You don't ever hear of corruption, or you don't hear of any of that negative things that you hear in the news a lot. That doesn't exist in Highland Heights. I'd love it if my parents would move there and retire, because I would feel safe knowing they were safe. Criminal defense, that's what I do for a living, and when I think back at the number of cases that I have out of Highland Heights, it's almost non-existent. Other than the one that we're here for, that we're talking about, I can't think of any crime that comes out of Highland Heights.
Later that night, after being arrested at the crime scene, Shayna Hubers is brought to the police station for questioning, and her behavior doesn't go unnoticed.
Shayna was taken straight from the scene to the Highland Heights Police Department. According to the individual who transported her, a local police officer, she talked the entire way there. Again, we're only talking a couple minutes, it's right down the road, but this girl who was just taken out of this scene talked the entire time. When they arrived, they placed her in the interview room. She wasn't aware that she was being recorded. No one informed her of that. And when they placed her in the room, she was crying. And the moment the door shut and she was alone, she stopped instantly. Began looking at her nails, began checking her clothes, began fidgeting.
Let me just figure it out. I'm in just a second. You're fine.
And after I asked her the basic questions, who she was and who that person was that was lying on the floor, she told me his name and that he lived there, and I asked her if she lived there, and she said no. Asked her some other information, and then she started talking and just kind of like interviewed me at that point.
Officers came in and out, and you could see on this video the performance. If someone was in the room, it was theatrics, it was tears, it was blubbering, it was hysteria. If she was alone, it was calm and quiet. She would dance, she would sing, she would laugh, and she could not stop talking.
She thought she was smarter than everybody else, but she kept changing her story in a way to where, you know, he was grabbed by the throat and thrown around, to where he was very abusive in the past. You know, it was just a lot of things that were inconsistent that you don't usually get when you're dealing with domestic violence, murder, or shooting or something like it. It just didn't fit that profile.
It was all that she tried to appear like a victim. She tried to appear how afraid she was. She tried to put on this face that wasn't true. So all the things that she said, the singing, the dancing, the bouncing off the walls in the interview when nobody was there, that was who she truly was. She just didn't realize the rest of the world was going to see that.
Early into being placed in that room, she invoked her Miranda rights, meaning police could not question her any further. She was not asked another question, and yet she proceeded to talk for 3 hours. She would ask for someone else. When somebody wasn't responding to her, wasn't engaged with her, she would ask for someone who would. She even asked, "Can I talk to you?" And she proceeded for 3 hours, desperate to tell her story.
Can I talk to you? Can I have somebody to talk to? Did you hear any of the story?
As we were listening to her talk, there were moments where we stopped and just had to question whether or not we really heard the words she said. One of the most important was when she said that Ryan was very vain and he would not want to be deformed.
And she said, "I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job that he wanted."
I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job he wanted.
I can remember looking to Chief Birkenhauer and saying, "Did she really just say that?"
Shayna made a comment in the interview room that people probably wouldn't want to marry her now, knowing that she'd killed her boyfriend in self-defense.
I don't know if anyone will ever want to marry me if they know that I killed my boyfriend in self-defense.
That's what her concern was. As Ryan was laying there with the crime scene unit taking pictures of his dead body, she was wondering if anybody else would want to marry her.
At some point in time, when the officers left her alone for a short time, she would start singing Amazing Grace.
How sweet the sound that sings around.
Shayna Hubers was certainly different, depending on who was in the room. When we had a female officer in that room, she talked like they were great friends.
You have very pretty teeth.
But when there was a male officer in that room, suddenly we could see her demeanor change. She started acting more meek and mild. She, blinked her eyelashes a lot at them, trying to get them to see things in a different way. She really thought that she could win them over. Each male that was in that room with her, it just didn't work.
The behavior in that room was not like anything you ever see in an interrogation room. She was strutting, she was snapping her fingers and chanting, "I did it, I did it, I did it."
I did it. Yes, I did it. I can't believe I did that.
She even muttered under her breath at one point when alone in the room, "I'm so good at acting," and laughed. To see somebody who had just murdered any individual, much less somebody they supposedly cared about, and dance and sing and celebrate, it was the most cold, depraved behavior I've ever seen in my career as a prosecutor.
So when I watched all those things she did when nobody was supposedly looking, I knew she was in trouble. She just showed her true character right there. She wasn't broken up inside. She wasn't scared. She wasn't any of that. She was thinking she was about to walk out of there and get away with it. And I knew she should be done for. The walls of fate were closing in on her.
On October 12, 2012, Ryan Poston, an attorney from Kentucky, is shot 6 times in his Highland Heights condominium by his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers. It is Hubers who calls 911 to report that she has killed Ryan, but insists that the killing is an act of self-defense.
So the following day, with the shooting happening the night of the 12th, the body would have been taken to autopsy. And at the autopsy, the medical examiner's job is from a scientific perspective to explain what happened to this individual. Clearly we knew this was a case involving gunshots, but the medical examiner's job is to explain to us what those gunshots did to Ryan Poston that ultimately resulted in his death.
They'll look at different things. We'll get the clothes from the autopsy from Mr. Poston's body. We brought that back because we wanted to do some forensic testing on that as far as firearms. Someone is shot, there is some stempling if it's close range. And then we'll have entry wounds and how many there were, damage to the body as well. So we'll have other information from that.
Some bullets passed through, some bullets remained in him. They did remove a number of projectiles and fragments from inside his body. To be blunt, these shots tore him apart. They entered his body and they perforated vital organs. They traveled throughout. A number of them exited. They wreaked absolute havoc on the inside of Ryan's body.
Following the autopsy report, the death of Ryan is ruled a homicide.
Ryan was a very smart guy from a great family. Ryan had 3 parents, a father, a stepfather, and a mother who cared deeply about him. He had 3 younger sisters that he was very protective of. He came from a large extended family of aunts, uncles, cousins.
Family was very important to him. He was very important to family.
Very, very close-knit upbringing. He had lived all over the world. He moved around with his stepfather's job to different places throughout Europe and Asia, and ultimately came back to America to attend college and came back to Northern Kentucky, where he graduated from law school, and he had set up his private practice here in Cincinnati, and that's what he was currently doing, was trying to get that law practice off the ground.
Ryan was a law clerk for an attorney that was in my building on my floor. And we'd see each other, it'd be 9, 10 o'clock at night, and we'd pass each other, and just 2 single guys talking, and just clicked very, very well. But I remember the first time we went out, it was after work, we were bored, wanted to grab something to eat or something, and we'd go down the street, and women were all over him, and I thought, wow, this guy obviously has something about him. I just knew Ryan as a friend. I didn't understand him to be this really good-looking individual or anything else, because he just my buddy. Women would come up to him and talk to him, and he wouldn't even have to go to them, but yet he was always nice to them. Women noticed Ryan, I guess is the best way to do it. He didn't exploit that at all. The guy was really a gentleman. Really a gentleman. Never degraded women, was kind, polite, all the time. It was the biggest funeral I've ever seen. I didn't know how a person could even know that many people.
There was an amazing turnout. People wanting to share their stories about Ryan, share their love for Ryan.
I had no idea there were this many people connected to Ryan. I seemed to be connected to the world. I mean, it was amazing, and everybody loved Ryan kind of the way I did. He was such an easy guy to talk to.
Shayna grew up far more modest than Ryan. She was the daughter of a public school teacher and a carpenter. Shayna was an only child. Her parents were older, and there is no doubt that Shayna was everything to her parents. Her entire life, Shayna was told she was special, that she was different, that things didn't apply to her. That's how her parents raised her. So she grew up believing that.
Ryan is 28 and Shayna Hubers is 20 when they meet in 2011. During their romance, Hubers is a psychology student at the University of Kentucky, about 80 miles from Highland Heights.
How does anybody meet nowadays? They met on the internet. Through a mutual friend, Ryan saw a picture of Shayna. He thought she was attractive, and he added her on Facebook, and they began communicating. And just like that, the ball started rolling towards his fate.
Both very intelligent. That's something he was interested in. Somebody who could match his level of intelligence. Somebody who would engage in conversations about important things. And those were some of the reasons why he might have initially sought out Shayna Hubers and was attracted to her. Ryan's family told us that his relationship with Shayna was strained at all times and that she was the biggest source of stress for him. He could not get rid of her. It was like that little gnat that you can't ever swat. She was just always there.
I could tell that, she was a little bit clingy, but what he kept telling me was he would break up with her, but she just wouldn't take no for an answer. And I honestly kind of faulted Ryan at this. What do you mean she doesn't take no? It didn't make any sense to me what he was saying. It's like, tell her you're done, over with, move on. I mean, common sense things at that time. I didn't understand how this was not breaking up. Well, I ended up figuring it out once I personally saw some crazy things that she was doing. Like, he would come to me and said, I finally broke up with her, it's over with. And then a half hour later, she's walking down my hallway all made up and bouncing. Oh, hi, Adam. I barely knew the girl at all. We met, he introduced us, because again, he's nice and polite. And all of a sudden, she's just walking down my hallway and what are you doing here? It was that weirdness. And then it kept amplifying. The weirdness kept amplifying.
There were people in his life that were concerned about Shayna Hubers. She would randomly show up walking in downtown Cincinnati. I remember somebody described it as dressed to the nines in the middle of the day when she knew Ryan was going out to lunch. And they would just randomly meet on the streets. She lives in Lexington, Kentucky. She lived about an hour and a half from there. What was she doing in downtown Cincinnati? She would create these chance meetings with Ryan. She made up some big story about her aunt dying in Hawaii, and she was going to leave her $2 million, but she needed legal help. That was another way to get back involved with Ryan. Because as a young attorney, of course Ryan's going to take a case. She would do anything she could to try to find a way to stay in Ryan's life.
She just simply wouldn't go away, and I was really getting concerned. Now, when I say really getting concerned, I'm not thinking anything awful would happen. I just thought, she's going to be a problem.
Shayna explained it as though they had been in this long-term, permanent, committed relationship, but that wasn't reality. She acted as though that they had met several years prior and remained together, and that he had treated her poorly throughout this time, and that she had endured all this mistreatment, and that on this particular night, in the course of him asking her to leave, they got into this fight that escalated to his murder.
On the night of his murder, Ryan was getting ready for a first date with a new girl he'd recently met. A new girl who was most definitely not Shayna Hubers.
Ryan was supposed to meet Audrey Bolte. They were going to be meeting at a local establishment in Milford, Ohio, which is close to where she lived. They were going to have a couple of drinks and get to know each other. They had been communicating on social media, and this was the first time that they were going to meet in person.
Audrey Bolte had formerly been Miss Ohio. There were a lot of pictures out there of her on the internet, including one particular picture of her in this large yellow evening gown. It was that file that was in a saved carved image on Shayna's phone that she had been looking at that morning.
So Shayna Hubers would access Ryan Poston's Facebook all the time. It was well known that she knew his password. She would block certain girls when they asked to be friends with Ryan. If she was jealous of somebody on social media, she got into Ryan's account and she blocked them. So here's what's interesting about Audrey, is that Ryan and Audrey had been talking. They had been making their plans to meet up on October 12th, the day that Ryan was murdered. Shayna Hubers also became friends with Audrey Bolte on Facebook. Shayna Hubers had Audrey Bolte's Miss Ohio photo in her computer. She knew what was happening. And Ryan was not going to choose somebody else over her. She was going to make sure of that.
Because she knew he had those plans that night, she was trying desperately to stick around. She was finding any reason to be in Cincinnati. She was finding any reason to be with him, and he kept telling her, I need space. I need to be alone this weekend. I have plans. You're not included. Telling her to go away. She wouldn't. He went to work that day, and he told them what his plans were. He told them, I've got everything off my back, now I gotta deal with Shayna. The only reason Ryan went home is his plans changed. He was supposed to meet Audrey Bolte right after work. Audrey Bolte had to attend the funeral for somebody she knew, so she asked if they could bump it back a few hours.
But Ryan didn't care. It was fine. He was going to be able to meet her later. However, that delay is what kept Ryan in his condominium. And that's what allowed Shayna Hubers to confront him one last time.
If Ryan had not gone home after work, who knows? Shayna probably still would have gotten to him somehow, but instead he went home, Shayna showed up there, and an hour later, 911 was called.
Following Ryan's murder, his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers is arrested and brought in for questioning. Despite asking for an attorney, Hubers continues to talk at length about what she has done, claiming she shot and killed Ryan in self-defense.
I don't have any serious injuries that I could have had, and I shot him in self-defense.
However, as they review the evidence at hand, investigators believe this was a murder fueled by pure envy.
The evidence collected from the apartment, the important things were clearly where he had been shot. He was seated in a chair at a table. That could be shown from his blood pattern, it could be shown from the position of his body, and it automatically dispelled this violent struggle of him chasing her around the room that she had painted for law enforcement. The shell casings were important. The shell casings, the grouping of them, showed that she had stood there the entire time and traveled around the table to access him better. The shots identified by the crime scene reconstructionists as being the first shots didn't have that stippling and those powder burns, but the subsequent one did, which means she got closer as she was shooting. She wasn't backing away from him, she was getting further on top of him. Those were the really important things to be taken from the scene. Ryan was going out with Audrey Bolte. She was a beautiful girl, and they'd agreed to meet up that night. Shayna knew. There were pictures on her phone of Audrey Bolte. So while Ryan is asleep in bed, in the middle of the night, she, on her phone, is looking at pictures of Audrey Bolte.
After the interrogation, Shayna Hubers is put into custody.
After being in the police department for a little over 2.5 hours, Sergeant Fornash came in and told her she was being charged with murder.
Shayna was very calm when she went into custody. When she was told she was being charged with murder, her first question was, what degree?
There's no degree. It's murder, and then we took her into custody and they transported her down to the jail.
We don't have degrees in the state of Kentucky. And that was essentially it. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She didn't show a lot of outrage. She didn't show a lot of emotion. So when she went into custody, it was probably the calmest she had been the entire 3-hour interaction.
On January 16th, 2013, in the case of Ryan Poston's murder, Shayna Hubers enters a plea of not guilty. The trial begins.
So Shayna's trial, her first trial, began in April of 2015, and that would have been the first time that her case was brought before a jury.
There was a packed courtroom. Ryan's friends and family were all there, and they're counting on us to bring in a guilty verdict. But more importantly than that, knowing how much Ryan loved the law and he loved the idea of justice, we felt the weight of that. It was our job to get the justice that Ryan loved so much, to make sure that for him, the justice was served.
Prosecutors argue that the motive for the murder is that Ryan wanted to permanently end his relationship with Hubers. Defense attorneys continue with their contention that the shooting is an act of self-defense and that Hubers is a victim of domestic abuse.
So on the first trial, the argument was that this was self-defense, that Ryan was the one that was attacking Shayna. And again, we go back to our crime scene reconstructionist. There is no physical evidence that shows that Ryan was attacking Shayna. She went forward, not backward. And that is not what someone who defends themselves does. That is what someone who is a predator does. She preyed on Ryan even in his injured state. After the first few shots, she kept going. She watched him as he made noises, and she lifted the gun and fired again.
Nothing happened to that girl. There was no violent struggle. There was no being tossed around. There was nothing of the sort. What you had was a man sitting down, telling her it was over, begging her to leave.
She was not thrown around that room. There was no evidence of it. And there would have been evidence. Keep in mind, Ryan is a bachelor. This is a bachelor pad. He's certainly not dusting once a week. So if anything would have been disturbed, we would have seen it. Shayna made a mention that she was thrown into the television. But when we showed up at the condominium, the television had not been moved. And we know it because there was so much dust that any bit of movement would have shown in that dust. She also made a mention that Ryan threw her into the bookcase. There were things on that bookcase that any tiny bit of pressure would have knocked over. Ryan had some antique ammunition sitting on its end. They were not pushed down. Ryan had pipes that were his grandfather's that were standing in a stand. Any movement toward that would have knocked them over if anyone was thrown into it. There was nothing. There was nothing that was done.
We had a cold-blooded, calculated murderer on our hands who was exploiting domestic violence, exploiting self-defense, trying to take the credibility away from the millions of other women in this world who live in domestic violence relationships because she wanted to kill someone.
Shayna trying to justify in some crazy psychotic way a horrible act that she did to a wonderful person.
Shayna Hubers lived her life through her social media or through her text messages. We literally got a calendar for the last year and a half of her life, and we could tell you where she was and what she was doing. But most importantly, we could tell you what she was thinking. Because remember, as prosecutors, we have to prove that she intentionally killed Ryan Poston. That's a hard thing, is to get into the mindset of another person. But with Shayna, she just opened the door for us. She gave us direct insight into what she was thinking and what she was doing just about every minute of the day.
Through the text messages, the prosecutors are able to showcase the extreme level of obsession Shayna Hubers has towards Ryan during their relationship. In one instance, after Ryan tries once again to break up with her, Hubers poses as a potential client seeking legal advice, just to get in touch with him through texting, hoping for any small bit of acknowledgement.
There were most definitely times that the glimpse into her phone, the glimpse into her mind, shocked the jury. There were times when you could see the puzzled look on their face where they just couldn't believe what they were seeing.
Despite the fact that Ryan wants nothing to do with Hubers at this point, a relative of Ryan's testifies at the trial that Ryan had texted claiming that Hubers was going so far as to break into his home. Although Shayna Hubers is imprisoned during the years leading up to her trial, she spends a lot of that time speaking with her fellow inmates.
As you figured out by now, Shayna can't help herself from talking. She actually cannot restrain herself from it. So you can imagine sitting in jail all those days, she had to talk about herself, had to talk about the case, and she talked a lot. She really grew to trust these girls. She told them things about her case, about their relationship, that ultimately became very, very important. She opened up to them about the fact that she was lying, that he didn't abuse her, that he wasn't abusive towards her, that it was her, that she had killed him out of jealousy. She told them that, and they came forward and told us those things.
They told us everything that she planned to do at trial. And one of the things that she wanted to do was to plead insanity. But she knew that that wouldn't fly because she's so smart and she has the IQ of Einstein. Again, remember, this is a narcissist we're talking about. Thinks she's smarter than everyone in any room she is in. And she thought that she was smarter than us. She thought she was smarter than the judge, but most importantly, she thought she was smarter than our jury. And that ultimately was her downfall.
The first trial was guilty. They sentenced her to 40 years. The 40 years, I wish it would have been more. It was a start for the family to be able to, feel like justice had been served.
The presiding judge does not view Shayna Hubers as a victim of domestic violence and even considers a sentence longer than 40 years.
Yes, I was happy with the verdict, a lot of it because at least it was conclusion. What bothered me is after 20 years, even with a 40-year verdict, after 20 years I knew she would be eligible for parole, and I knew that she had a decent chance of getting it.
Following the 2012 shooting of Ryan, his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers is found guilty of his murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. She is eligible to apply for parole after 20 years of her sentence. However, a new challenge in this case is about to emerge.
Ryan's family, what they felt after that first verdict was a sense of justice for Ryan. They felt like they could finally start with healing, but that was short-lived.
There was an issue where the juror on that trial had a prior felony conviction for failing to pay child support. In the state of Kentucky, getting a certain amount behind on your child support can be a felony charge.
Under Kentucky law, if you are convicted of a felony, you are not able to serve as a juror. So we knew at that point in time that the judge was going to have no choice but to set aside the verdict.
With the 2015 verdict being set aside, Shayna Hubers' guilty verdict is overturned, and in August 2018, she is tried for Ryan's murder for the second time.
What we were most afraid of was relaying this information to the family, because we fought so hard for them. We fought hard for Ryan, and we knew we would do it again, but it was just the fact that we had to do it a second time in a very tearful phone call. The hardest call that I've ever had to make. But what I will say about Ryan's family, they immediately said, okay, what do we have to do?
First thing they have to contend with is the fact that she could actually walk away from this. And that was horrible in and of itself. Not only not have closure, but then the wound is opened up again, fresh as ever.
They were so supportive of us and the job that we had. They were patient when we told them it was going to take a long time, and they never lost faith, knowing that we would do what was right for Ryan. And even this setback that to us felt like it was the worst news we could possibly get, they were just right on board again and said, let's do it again.
August 8th, 2018 was the day to deliver opening statements. Your opening statement in a murder trial is your opportunity to tell the jury why they should listen to you, why your case is the one that has credibility, why you're going to be the ones in the courtroom speaking the truth. We had to offer them enough to let them know that the only dangerous person in this relationship was her, that the only abusive person in this relationship was her, that the only violent person in this relationship was her. Here they see this young, tiny woman, well-dressed, sitting at that table, and you have to let them know not to be fooled by her appearance, that the person sitting across from them can in fact be a monster.
We wanted the jury to remember this. Ryan was only going to leave that condominium either as Shayna Huber's boyfriend or in a body bag. For the second trial, we had a new witness who said she didn't even realize that the first trial had happened, but when she heard about it, she connected the dots, and she said, that was the girl that was at my counter. So earlier in the day, around dinner time, on the day that Ryan Poston was murdered, Shayna Hubers goes to the Dillards at the local mall and is talking to people there. And she made multiple statements saying that her boyfriend had broken up with her and was going to go out with another girl and she was going to kill him. She said it over and over again. At the time, of course, like other people, you don't put any truth into those statements until you hear that within just a few hours after those statements were made, her boyfriend was killed by her. We knew that there was no way that she was going to go through a second trial without taking that stand. She's a narcissist. Her own doctor tells us. It was really hard for her not to testify in the first trial. There was no way she was not going to take that stand in the second trial.
We had no idea what to expect and what we were going to need, because when somebody like Shayna is going to take the stand, which you have to prepare for that possibility, you don't know what they're going to say. She has no qualms about lying, and we know that about her.
So we approached everything from being able to refute her testimony. No matter what Shayna said, we were going to be able to refute it.
Ryan's sister, she is an absolute warrior of a person, and when she took that stand in the second trial, she had a teddy bear with her. She had brought it for a reason, and when she pressed the paw, it played Ryan's voicemail. And she explained to the jury that that was all they had left, a teddy bear with Ryan's voice inside.
We had to let Ryan's voice be heard. And that's exactly what Ryan's sister did. To see a family who has nothing left other than a voice coming out of a teddy bear. We're not just talking about Ryan losing his life. We are talking about every one of his family and friends who will never be the same. We have to talk about the empty table at every Christmas dinner and every Thanksgiving and every birthday. We have to talk about the lost children that Ryan could have had. This is more than just Ryan's life that was impacted.
She took the witness stand, and she did her best to account for some of her erratic behavior from that horrible police interrogation.
I shot him twice, thought he was completely dead and he was laying there still, and I shot him in the head.
I talked a lot about Shayna Hubers being jealous, but I remember starting the closing with Shayna's own words, because no matter what words come out of my mouth, nothing was as impactful as what came out of Shayna's mouth. I did it. Yep, I did it.
I did it. Yes, I did it. I can't believe I did that.
Can I say anything that's more powerful than that? Or that she gave him the nose job he wanted.
One of our last conversations we had that was good was that he wants my best friend who's a dentist to do his veneers and wants to get a nose job. And I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job.
Shayna talked a lot about a lot of things that didn't have anything to do with Ryan's murder. She tried to portray herself as a victim.
She took it as an opportunity to paint this as a relationship where he was sex obsessed, that he tried to make their relationship all about sex, but that wasn't what the evidence supported. The text messages were there, where Ryan was telling her it wasn't that important to him, where Ryan was telling her it's not that big of a deal, where she was saying, why don't you show interest in me? Why don't you have sexual desire for me? So the text messages told a different story than what she told on the stand.
So she tried to create this reality that just didn't exist, and tried to make herself look sympathetic when in reality, all she did was make herself look like a liar. She lied to her attorneys. She lied to Ryan. At that point in time, I don't know if there was anybody she didn't lie to. And having a defendant acknowledge on the stand that even the people that are on her team that she lied to is so hard to overcome. Because of course, who else would she have lied to? the jury.
After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury comes to a verdict.
On August 23rd, 2018, there was a guilty verdict. Shayna was sentenced to life in prison.
4 little letters. L-I-F-E, life. The level of commitment to this case over the years, 6, 7 years, is something that I've never seen before. Me and my co-workers, everybody at the police department, and most importantly, Ryan's family and friends. Nobody gave up. It would have been real easy to do that after the first verdict was set aside, but we tried to see it as the gift that we wanted, a second shot at life.
Obsession, jealousy, I'm not sure the word, but the fixation she had on him, again, looking back, I thought he had it under control, and now it's obvious.
Shayna was hands down the most obsessively jealous person I have ever met. It consumes her to where she could think of nothing else but Ryan, where he was at, who he was with, what he was doing, why not with her. The jealousy that she felt, the need to have him, absolutely consumed her. I think of Ryan all the time. I think of Ryan when I drive past the apartment complex. I think of Ryan when I hear certain songs on the radio for someone that I didn't know, but yet feel like I know so well through the glimpse into their world, through his phone, through his computer, through his Facebook. Somebody I feel like I had conversations with because I've read everything that went on in his life for so many years. I think of him far too often.
Ryan was the ultimate gentleman. While I was his senior, I actually looked up to him. Kind to everybody. He never spoke down to people. He didn't treat people bad. Even when he was treated poorly by somebody, he would take the upper road. I still feel the void. There's never going to be anybody like Ryan.
Charlottesville, Albemarle County. The body of a female student is discovered by her roommates in their college campus apartment at the University of Virginia.
The 911 call was placed by her roommates to police because they had found her face down on her pillow in bed.
The victim has been subjected to a violent attack in her residence.
They also discovered a door with a hole kicked in.
Police arrive at the scene and quickly identify the young woman as 22-year-old Yardley Love, a senior college student just weeks away from graduation. Investigators learn that Yardley had recently broken up with her college boyfriend, a 22-year-old fellow student and athlete who already had a troublesome past.
I don't think she was afraid of him at all, but eventually the threats turned deadly.
This is the story of a jealous lover, his uncontrollable rage, and the tragic consequences it would have for the family and friends of Yardley Love.
She found the good in every soul that she met and the good in every situation she encountered. It's happening to the family next door, which is exactly what Yardley was, the girl next door.
The University of Virginia is located in the city of Charlottesville, approximately 120 miles southwest of Washington, D.C.
Charlottesville is a very genteel community and a beautiful university for some of America's brightest students.
In May 2010, this idyllic college town is rocked by the brutal death of a young female college student. Yardley Love, a 22-year-old student at the University of Virginia, is found unresponsive in her campus apartment, with clear signs of trauma following a violent struggle.
Yardley's 2 roommates came home and they found her face down in her bed. Initially, they just thought she was passed out. Then they saw blood and they realized something very violent had happened to her, and they called 911.
Officers from Charlottesville Police Department respond to the call and arrive at Yardley's apartment on 14th Street.
When police arrived, they saw the blood on the pillow. They saw obvious signs of a struggle. They saw the door had been kicked in, and they realized something terribly wrong had unfolded.
News of the tragedy soon reaches Yardley's family in her hometown of Cockeysville, Maryland.
It was probably 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was asleep. A policeman came to my door, and when I opened the door, they asked me if I was Yardley Love's mother. I said yes, and then I guess everything went blank after that. I don't think the policeman even had to tell me.
I was in my exam week of my last year of college, and I had actually stayed up late studying with a friend, and I was so tired, and my phone was ringing at 6 o'clock in the morning. When I answered the phone, she said that it was Katie and that I should wake one of my friends up because she had something really bad to tell me.
About 5:45, Monday morning, May 3rd, and I got a call on my phone, and it was my administrator who had told me that there had been an accident that involved Yardley and that there was a lot of blood. And I said, well, what did she hit? Like, where was she going? Was she in town? And she said, she's been beaten up, and they found her dead in her bed.
8:29 a.m. on May 3rd. One of my dearest friends was an assistant coach at UVA. She said, are you driving? I said, I'm at work. I need to tell you that Yardley Love has been murdered. And there was this silence. She said the state troopers had just been at Mrs. Love's to let her know. And we both started crying.
Police now want to learn more about Yardley's life on campus in the weeks leading up to her murder.
Police asked the roommates what they knew, and all they could say is we had come home and walked in on this. Police officers then asked who could have done this, and the roommates said, George.
Yardley had been in a relationship with another student at the university, 22-year-old George Hughley, but they had recently broken up.
When the police officer said, you have any idea who would ever want to hurt her? I said, she did used to date a jerk, and his name was George, but I can't imagine that anyone that could love Yardley could do this to Yardley.
George Hughley was in his final year at the time of Yardley's death and played with the university men's lacrosse team.
Yardley lived in one building with some of her lacrosse teammates, and George lived across the parking lot in another building with some of his lacrosse teammates. There was no evidence of forced entry into Yardley's building because so often the teams just left the doors open between them.
From the start, George was way more interested in Yardley than Yardley was interested in George. The first time we talked, he told me, you have to get your best friend to like me and go out with me. And at that time, she had a boyfriend who was another one of his teammates on his lacrosse team. And I remember thinking that didn't really feel right that he was saying that, especially because it was his teammate that she was dating at the time.
I knew that Yardley started to date a guy on the lacrosse team at the beginning of her second year. They were all friends their first year, but then it actually turned into a romantic relationship at some point during her second year.
It was just so many experiences and parties and dates and being out together that he finally wore her down in a sense, and her 2 best friends were dating his 2 best friends, and so it honestly became easier for her just to sort of explore what that would be like to take their relationship from friendship to romantic.
Police very quickly knew that they needed to interview George, and they began to understand from conversations with others that the couple had had some tension, that George had made some threats.
The first time that I truly questioned him as a person was a night that we were home over a break that we were back from college, and we went out together to a bar, and then we came back and we were sleeping at my parents' house, and she hadn't been texting him back or answering his calls. I think he called her like 30 times in a row, and she just brushed it off. And I remember being so rattled by the fact that he would not stop calling her, even when she finally did answer and said, I'm at Catherine's house and we're going to bed and I'll talk to you in the morning, and that wasn't good enough. And he immediately went on this very aggressive offense where he was accusing her of, you're not at Catherine's, I know you're with a guy, and she had never done anything like that to make him think that. And I remember in the morning asking her, like, is that normal? And she was like, yeah, you know, he just gets protective and he wants to know what I'm doing all the time. And I remember that was like the first time that I started to be a little bit more concerned that he really wasn't a good person for her to be spending time with.
Investigators now want to speak to Hughley about his movements on the night of Yardley's death and bring the student in for questioning.
George said Yardley was upset. He described a confrontation. George said he had gone to her apartment, that he was trying to get her, in his words, to chill. He said that she was standing with her back against the wall and that she began bouncing her head off the wall. He said he might have grabbed her. He said he might have thrown her on the bed. He said he left her alone.
He didn't think that he had hurt her. He certainly didn't think he had killed her. He said she was alive when he left and that he could never do that. But he had been drinking heavily the day before, and his memory was not on point.
Police search George Hughley's campus apartment and uncover suspicious bloodstains in the bathroom.
I think that he slowly started to spiral out of control once she really broke up with him for the last time. I think he knew that it was done forever. I think she had made it very clear, we're graduating college, we're finally going to be separated from one another geographically, I'm not going to be forced to see you all the time, and like, this is it. I'm going to just tough it out the rest of college, even if it means missing things, because I cannot stand to be around you anymore, and this is now really unhealthy, and I don't want to be anywhere near you.
Hughley undergoes a medical examination, which reveals fresh cuts and bruising on his body.
I didn't understand the magnitude of that jealousy and that fear of what if she's not mine forever.
Hughley continues to protest his innocence in Yardley's death, but investigators now believe they have enough evidence to formally charge him with murder.
Police zeroed in on what they believed to be true, that Yardley had been the victim of a massive assault, had been injured gravely, and that George had a role in it. There were no other suspects. The DNA evidence clearly put him at the scene, and he was arrested the next day for her murder.
George Hughley is remanded in custody awaiting trial for the murder of Yardley Love, while Charlottesville and the close-knit university campus community try to come to terms with the senseless tragedy.
I couldn't tell the team what had happened until George was arrested. So we needed him in custody before we could let anyone know. I mean, people fell to the floor, the guttural pain, the shock. I remember the hugs, I remember the silence. Just being able to hear kind of the tears and the crying. Every single player that walked into the lawn room that we were in, when I said that Yardley had been hurt and that she wasn't okay,
May 2010, Charlottesville, Virginia. 22-year-old college student Yardley Love has been brutally murdered at her campus residence.
This is a murder that stunned the college community. University of Virginia and Charlottesville are not places where these sort of things are supposed to happen.
The police investigation quickly focuses in on Yardley's ex-boyfriend, George Hughley, who has a history of violent and controlling behavior.
That morning, by 9 o'clock, he was in custody and being interrogated. He didn't think that it was possible that she was dead.
Police did not consider any other suspects in her murder. And as they began to ask questions of Yardley's friends, it became apparent to police and to the friends themselves that each of them had small pieces of the story, but none of them had been successfully able to put together the puzzle that Yardley's life was in danger.
George was a very jealous person. He just had his own insecurities that made him judge and question other people. I think he wanted everyone to know that they were together, and so he had a really hard time when they weren't together, if they were both back home at their own hometowns or, out even at college doing their own thing. That usually started a fight because he would pick a fight and try and get attention, and he didn't like that she was spending time with other people. He wanted to be the center of attention, and Yardley was very independent.
Yardley's family and friends struggle to understand how they failed to see the warning signs in Hughley's behavior.
There was one incident when they were all at a party and he grabbed her, and that scared her. But that was the only time she ever mentioned that she was afraid of him, because I was going to go talk to his lacrosse coach, and she said, "Oh no, it's not that big of a deal. Don't worry about that."
I think they had stretches where the relationship was strong, and then there were stretches where Yardley couldn't really even stand to talk about him. He was driving her crazy, but because of the close-knit sense of their college community, especially as lacrosse players, she couldn't really escape him. And so she always sort of tried, I think, to find a way to make it easier for everyone and pacify the group and just go with the flow, and then they would find their way back to one another.
I'm fairly sure that most of the adults in Yardley's life have 20/20 hindsight and wish we had handled things differently or been more aggressive in terms of, separating them or getting her out of that situation.
Both Yardley and George played on the lacrosse teams for the University of Virginia and bonded initially over their love for the game. News of Yardley's death sends shockwaves through the tight-knit lacrosse community.
Our reaction was, how do we take care of our team? We let the men take care of the men's team. They were grieving the loss of Yardley as a great friend to them, not as a teammate, but they were also then like, how could one of our teammates do that to one of our friends?
It was all in. It was truly a resounding reflection of the lacrosse community and in a larger sense than in a non-prep community. Some of the younger girls on the team had older sisters that played with Yardley. There were also people who had brothers that played on the men's team at UVA. We had a big game at the end of the week. We asked Sharon. Sharon said, ask the girls what they want to do. And they said, we want to play.
The funeral that weekend is when we really saw the men's team come again. And a lot of the men's players were the pallbearers. That was huge. It was huge for me to see. I knew that they were going to be involved, but when they walked in to a packed church carrying Yardley, it was, I thought, another amazing statement from Sharon Love and from Lexi and the family that the team didn't do this to Yardley. This was George that did this to Yardley, and she wanted Yardley's friends to feel loved by her just like Yardley had loved them.
Yardley Love grew up in the city of Cockeysville, near Baltimore, Maryland, surrounded by a loving family and a close network of friends.
We had neighborhood teams everywhere. When she was 5 years old, she went and played lacrosse, which was kind of just chasing dirt on the ground. She just took to it, practiced all the time. A lot of play was bouncing lacrosse balls off the garage doors.
I met Yardley when I was 10 years old. Our older sisters actually went to the same school that we ended up going to, and they're the same year as well. So we had a similar family dynamic, and our sisters thought that we would be friends once we started at the same school. And then honestly, from the day we met, we became best friends.
I met Yardley as a middle school student. There were probably 25 spots on the team, and there were probably over 100 people trying out for those 25 spots. So for a freshman to make varsity, it's quite a feat. As a lacrosse player, she had great skills. She was on task all of the time. She was one of the first people up to the field to get warmed up and start practice.
I met Yardley at lacrosse camp. The whole team seemed to come to Charlottesville to come and play lacrosse for 3 or 4 days. Yardley came to camp full of life, always friends, but always looking out for the people that she didn't even really know, which is what I was drawn to at first. And then I started watching her play, and she was very talented.
But Yardley's sense of responsibility for her teammates and inner drive for success has its roots in an earlier family tragedy.
Losing Yardley's dad was a huge pivotal moment for her and for her family, and honestly for our friend group as a whole, just seeing that life is short and seeing the emotional maturity that we sort of needed to pull together. And I think losing him was very, very hard for her, and I think that a big part of her drive and what really kicked her into gear was wanting to make him proud.
Yardley receives a lacrosse sports scholarship from the University of Virginia and moves to Charlottesville to begin her freshman year majoring in political science.
When Yardley was a freshman, she would come over to my co-coach, Lisa, and I, and she would thank us at the end of every practice. She would thank us at the end of class. She would thank us at the end of every game. And I'll never forget that.
Living on campus offers Yardley the opportunity to socialize and mix with players from the university men's lacrosse team. Yardley is introduced by mutual friends to fellow freshman George Hughley, an All-American lacrosse player.
I had heard of him, but I can't say that I actually knew him. We do share fields and we pass each other, and they are in helmets and pads and whatnot.
The spell that she was able to cast on so many people, he had just totally kind of fallen for her. I think for a long time she tried to keep it at a friendship because she did think he was funny and she loved to laugh. She was drawn to his sort of the character that he could be.
She was excited. It was her first real in-town college boyfriend. Her friends were dating his friends, and it just made sense. It was who she was hanging with anyway, and he had a lot of friends around him on the guys' team and on our women's team.
I didn't meet him very often because when the girls played in town, the boys played out of town.
But Hughley's larger-than-life persona fails to impress everyone he meets.
I met him once at UVA when they were both playing in Charlottesville, and he came to my house once and had dinner and spent the night. I thought he was very laid back, somewhat unambitious, and he seemed immature.
He came off as very loud and charismatic and silly. I'd noticed from the first few encounters that I had with him that he could be very hot and cold. And I just thought he was a little bit too much. It was my best friend's boyfriend who we spent time together because of that reason only.
As the relationship between Yardley Love and George Hughley begins to deepen, he starts to display jealous and controlling behavior towards her.
There was more than one episode of violence witnessed by others when George had attacked Yardley. In one occasion, members of a rival lacrosse team from the University of North Carolina responded to pull George off of Yardley as he attacked her.
All of these behaviors started to really escalate and to surface as they got deeper into their relationship, and then as she was pulling out of that relationship.
George was just so good at working his way out of his bad behavior and covering up for it and almost turning it around a lot of times or making light of it and being the jokester, that he got away with so much for so long because he found his way out.
In another instance, George attacked a fellow member of his own team who had walked Yardley home.
I remember her thinking that it was so strange, and she was honestly so disgusted by it. His friends were the exact same way. They would agree with everything that Yardley said, and they would feel the same way about his behavior. But then he just had this way of being this jolly, funny, sweep it under the rug, it's not that serious, and he would talk everyone out slowly but surely.
Cracks begin to appear towards the end of graduation year.
They dated on and off from our second year of college through the first half of our fourth year of college, so on and off for 2 years.
George and Yardley were 2 weeks from graduation, and they had broken up. He had been obsessed with her. Police believed that while he wanted to play the field, he didn't want anyone else to have Yardley.
Really, he was running around on her behind her back and things like that. That's why she left him. And he was fine with that until she met somebody else.
that like set something off inside of him that slowly just got like deeper and deeper. And then I think he was in such a bad mental state that the inner demon within him came out, and he made the worst decision of his life.
Charlottesville, Virginia, 2010. Police have arrested 22-year-old George Hughley for the murder of fellow college student and former girlfriend Yardley Love at her university campus apartment. Yardley was discovered with blunt force trauma injuries sustained during a prolonged physical attack.
Yardley losing her dad made her grow up a lot faster than the average 20-something-year-old, and so she was very easily able to like go do things on her own. She really valued her friendships with her girlfriends. Her mom and her sister she spent a ton of time with, so she was never someone that like loved having a boyfriend and wanted to just like stay in and hang out with a boyfriend. She was on the go because that was just the way she was. She was independent.
Investigators now look into Hughley's past as they build the court case against him for first-degree murder.
In the Chevy Chase community of suburban Washington where George hailed from, there were those who saw in the allegations an echo of George's own father's behavior. George and his father both had run-ins with police. Those who knew the younger George in college saw a young man who was reckless, who felt he was above the law, who felt he could get away with anything that he wanted to. And in many ways, they portrayed that as an echo of the way he was raised by his father.
Evidence of Hughley's erratic and violent behavior emerges from multiple sources.
George unfortunately had a known history of violence and of threats.
He just had a really fast temper, really compulsive, I think, like, you know, quick to fly off the handle, and physical, like he had gotten in fights with other people.
As the investigation unfolds, police discover that Hughley had tried to cover his tracks after attacking Yardley.
He tried to remove the evidence. He'd taken carpets from Yardley's apartment. He'd taken laptops, perhaps to delete emails that documented their tensions and his threats. He took away a Virginia lacrosse shirt with red stains, socks, anything that had blood stains on it. Police found all this evidence in the dumpster outside the apartment. In the investigation, police were able to uncover texts and emails that he had sent threatening Yardley. In his past, there were episodes of his excessive drinking and his arrests for drinking and his punishments for drinking, much of which was unknown to the university athletic community at the University of Virginia. But it was well known among George's peers and among Yardley's friends that he was prone to violence when he drank.
Police retrace Hughley's steps on the day of Yardley's murder.
Earlier that day, George Hughley had been playing golf with his father. George and his father had been drinking all day, and they'd been seen having an argument outside of a parking garage. Later on, George went to the neighborhood bar Boylan Heights, where some of their friends had been hanging out. Yardley had been there for a little while, and then one of their mutual friends walked her home. This sparked a jealous rage by Hughley, because he was obsessed with her.
This fell in line with his personality. This wasn't like, you know, a golden boy all of a sudden has a mental breakdown. This was a lot of questionable things that he had been doing for years, and then this was the one that really actually finally got him in trouble.
Despite the overwhelming evidence linking him to the crime, Hughley continues to fight the prosecution's case against him.
George Hughley never did admit to the crime, never apologized to myself or my daughter for what he did.
The DA can only work with what the police gather. The DA will direct the police. The DA will say, we're strong in this area, we're weak in this area. So the DA always guides an investigation that police then must carry out.
On the 18th of April 2011, after a not guilty plea from Hughley, a grand jury indicts him on first-degree and felony murder charges.
It's never enough for an alleged assailant to say, "I did it." Police and prosecutors still have to go to great lengths to build a case, to collect the evidence, to collect statements, to collect the statements of others, to gather the testimony. In the same way that reporters try to look for multiple sources, police have to find multiple sources to back up what an assailant says or doesn't say. Because at any point, the assailant could change his or her mind.
On the 7th of January 2012, 5 additional charges are added against Hughley: felony murder, robbery of a residence, burglary, entering a house with intent to commit a felony, and grand larceny.
The DA was presented with a very strong case. The evidence was there, the motives were there, the testimony was there. His family brought to bear money and connections to reduce the punishment against him. Early on, one of George's attorneys told the media Ms. Love's death was not intended, but an accident with a tragic outcome.
Justice for Yardley still hangs in the balance as her family and friends prepare for the trial. Charlottesville, Virginia. Student George Hughley is awaiting trial for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, 22-year-old Yardley Love, in May 2010. Yardley was found unresponsive in her college campus apartment by her roommates.
Police asked the roommates who might have done this, and the roommates immediately pointed them to George Hughley.
Yardley never told me that she was scared of him, but Yardley was a people pleaser, and I think Yardley was so worried about worrying other people that she felt guilty making someone else take on her stress and some of her anxieties. But I know she told other people that she was scared of him.
The trial begins on the 6th of February 2012, nearly 2 years after Yardley's death.
It took 2 years to get to the trial, so when it finally did happen, it was hard coming face to face with George Hughley again.
There was no way I wasn't going to go to the trial to support her family and to be there for her still. But sitting through and having to relive the moment-to-moment playback of what happened the night that she died was awful. And having to hear like a police officer use such cold terminology or the medical examiner explain her injuries made me physically ill.
In court, the judge was very, very sensitive to the privacy of the family members. Only the worst images were shown to the jury, but not to the assembled crowd or to the media. Family did not see the visual of George's 46-minute interrogation, but they heard the audio. They heard George, they heard his anguish when he discovered that Yardley was dead. They heard him deny that he had any role in it. They heard his disbelief that her life had been taken. At one point during the interrogation, when confronted with Yardley's loss, he actually said to police, "Kill me."
Despite Hughley's history of violent and controlling behavior, there is insufficient evidence to prove he had planned to murder Yardley on the night he went over to her apartment.
Originally, he was charged with first-degree murder. The charge was dropped to second-degree murder because prosecutors didn't believe that there was any evidence that this was premeditated.
On the 22nd of February 2012, the jury finds George Hughley guilty of the second-degree murder of Yardley Love and an additional charge of grand larceny.
There did not seem to be ever any doubt that there would be a conviction in this case. Ultimately, so many of these cases do rest on convincing 12 people that someone has committed a crime.
It's a little nerve-wracking not being sure what the outcome would be. I didn't think he would get off, but I thought maybe the charges would be manslaughter or something reduced.
We actually went down for a couple days to support Sharon, and from our conversation with Sharon and from seeing how that district attorney handled it, I don't think that there was anybody that was more dedicated to making sure that Hughley was convicted than that man that handled that case, and he did a magnificent job.
The DA in this case, had enough evidence to present to jurors who made the decision that George Hughley was guilty.
You watch the whole process hoping that the jury saw it the same way we did, and they did.
On the 30th of August 2012, Hughley is sentenced at Charlottesville District Court.
Jury sentenced George to 23 years in prison for second-degree murder and 1 year for burglary.
George Hughley will get out in 5.5 years. He'll still be young. He'll still have a full life ahead of him. I hope he's changed, but I don't think he has.
With Hughley now safely behind bars, Yardley's family and friends reflect on the impact she had on the lives of everyone she met.
It seemed like everybody loved Yardley. I never heard an unkind word. You don't know really what your child does once they're not under your roof. And so when this happened, you don't know what somebody's going to say or do, or some experience that I know nothing about. But every single thing said about Yardley was so kind, and people just rallied around so much. I think she was just a really good person.
A lot of people felt that Yardley was very special, but I think it was a lot of the things that she did when no one was watching that really set her apart as a friend and a person. She didn't do the right thing for accolades. She did it because she had an amazing moral compass, and I think for her it felt good to do the right thing because that was just how she was, and that was in her DNA.
If she was your daughter, you would pat yourself on the back and say, I crushed it. I really raised an amazing young woman. She was as beautiful on the inside as on the out. And she was as good a friend as you could ever have.
The seniors, when they were going the week of prom, would get up and they would describe their dresses to each other. At the end of practice, we'd take 10 minutes and we'd say, okay, you two stand up and let's hear about your prom dresses. And of course, it was Yardley's turn, and she stood up and she used a term. I said, Yardley, I don't know what you're talking about. It sounds beautiful. I'm sure it will be beautiful on you. And she said, you know what, Miss B, I will come and show you the day of prom. I said, Yardley, you're going to have 5,000 things to do. You're not going to want to come on campus and show me your dress. I'll be there. So she left a pre-party with her dear friend, and they came in their full prom dresses to an afternoon at the prep at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when they're supposed to be off being very girly and getting ready for their prom. I was always moved by that, because nobody else was going to do that. But it meant the world to me.
Following the tragedy of her daughter's death, Yardley's mother, Sharon Love, creates a non-profit organization to raise awareness among young people of the hidden signs of domestic violence.
What connected with me more than anything was not the trial, was not the murder, but was the reaction of Yardley Love's family after the fact, to find the best things about her, to celebrate and use those as a way to empower other young women and men to be alert to the dangers that had taken Yardley's life.
We had 2 years between when Yardley was murdered and when the trial started, and it gave me time to do research. And I realized, surprisingly, that 18 to 24-year-olds are the most vulnerable group of people to domestic violence. So that was when I decided we had to do something.
One Love started with Yardley's mom and sister and all of her cousins and friends and all our coaches and teammates wanting to do something. Everyone just felt so hopeless and so devastated. And so we wanted to come together to do something. And so it started honestly as just selling t-shirts and raising money to create a turf field at our high school for the future students to play on.
The university convened a vigil drawing more than 1,500 people. The university president spoke to the assembled students and said that at no point should any woman, any student have to fear these kinds of circumstances. It elevated the conversation about partner abuse, about domestic abuse, about awareness and red flags and things that people should be aware of. And the university took a leading role in trying to put that forward, which the family itself then followed through on.
I never thought about domestic violence in that age group ever. When I grew up, it seemed that people were married with children and trapped with no income and couldn't get out. That was my image of domestic violence.
I cannot tell you the places I've been and I see like a One Love sticker or a One Love t-shirt, and the number of people that come up to me to tell me that they participated in a workshop or that One Love saved their life or one of their friends' lives. It's definitely one of my proudest accomplishments, is being part of a movement that has made such a difference already.
They really helped. They helped kind of get it out there. This is not just happening with families that are marginalized. This is happening in a lot of different places, and we need to start to pay attention to it.
I can say in full confidence, the work the One Love Foundation has done in Yardley's honor and memory has absolutely saved lives, and it is absolutely going to continue to do just that. I'm incredibly proud and grateful for the work that's been done.
Our student body approaches their relationships differently because of the education of the One Love Foundation and because it hits so close to home. I want to say that we are adding a thread of protection for our young lives that needed to happen.
Yardley Love's legacy is commemorated at Notre Dame Preparatory High School, where a lacrosse playing field has been named in her honor.
My silver lining will always be that I taught her, I coached her. She made a huge impact on me, and I miss her every day. But while she was here, she made the world a better place, and even in her passing, she's made the world a better place.
It's always the hope when I cover a story like this that it informs and it educates, and that people, if they don't see themselves, maybe they see someone they know, and that this story is a way for people to begin looking out for others in their world.
The University of Virginia also remembers Yardley every year, in their own special way.
Every May 3rd, since 2011, the women's lacrosse team has painted Beta Bridge, which is this huge bridge that really connects kind of the central grounds over to the fraternities and sorority world. So everybody comes up and down Rugby Road, but you paint the bridge. You could paint it in 1 hour. It could be somebody could paint over it immediately. Like, people don't even let that paint dry necessarily. They write our website. They help people understand as they pass that bridge, walk on that bridge, see that bridge, take pictures of the bridge, that, you know, hey, we lost somebody really important to the university. We lost somebody who had the brightest future as of anybody. So just take a moment, go to the website, learn, and just pay attention to what we're doing.
I think every parent wants to do something to remember their child, and I would suggest that they have a place or a bench or anything that they want to start, just to have a memorial for a young person.
Thankfully, I do think that so many of these colleges have seen time and time again stories like Yardley's pop up, and they do not want to be the next campus that is under the spotlight for the most terrible reason in the world. So I think the fact that now coaches and programs are stopping to slow down to find a way to make sure that their athletes are as healthy as they can be, especially in their relationships, and trying to really arm them with curriculum and conversation and workshops that are going to make them better humans, better players, just all around better people, is so important, and it does make me feel more hopeful for the future.
I would say it's across the board, but I do think student athletes and professional athletes are certainly highlighted. So you hear that story more often. Winning isn't everything. We need to remind the kids, this is your mindset on a field and in a game, but in a relationship, it is exactly not that. If you bring that mindset off the court, off the field, and into a relationship, you're doomed.
It's always hard for me, even after covering crime stories for 20 years, to understand why certain stories take off and capture the public imagination. This one resonated for so many because these were two people from a like background, well-to-do, terrific potential. Their lives collided in unexpected ways, resulting in horrific violence and a terrible loss. So many people look at lives like these and think, well, they've got it all figured out. They've got it together. It's not going to happen to these people. And so when it does, it jerks our eyes and holds us hostage.
Can't reverse what was done, so justice is not necessarily in my vocabulary, but I think everybody did the absolute best they could, and we got the best outcome possible. But it didn't bring Yardley back.